Hey everyone, in today's major announcement video, I'm going to go over the new saliva drug testing rule that was just made official as of this past week. I'm going to explain the rule and give you my predictions on how it may roll out over the next couple of months. I'm going to be looking down here. I made a lot of notes. The final rule and its explanation is very, very lengthy, about 200 or so pages, a little over 200 pages. I will leave a link if you actually want to read the full explanation of the rule in the description box down below. I will just go over briefly the summary, but again, I'm going to be looking down just because I've made a lot of notes after reading through the rule. So first off, this is going to pertain to a few different federal government agencies: the Office of the Secretary of Transportation, the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, the FMCSA. They oversee truck drivers. The Federal Railroad Administration, this one's obvious, the FRA. The FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, and the Department of Transportation, the DOT. So if your job is overseen by any of these agencies, this video is going to pertain to you. But to be honest, whenever the federal government adopts a new standard as far as a safety procedure, generally private industries will adopt it as well. So I think this is probably going to be applicable to anyone that has to go through drug testing for any reason. So there's a lot to unpack here and a lot that's still kind of unknown at this point, but I'm going to do my best to give you the facts that we know up until this point and then my interpretation of the rule and how I think it is going to play out over the next few months. So first, just so there is no ambiguation, let me just read you the summary. It's only a paragraph or two long, so let me just read through the summary of the new rule. And again, there is a link to this summary in the description box below. All right, the summary. This final rule amends the U.S. Department of Transportation's Regulated Industry Drug Testing Program to include oral fluid testing. This additional methodology for drug testing will give employers a choice that will help combat employee cheating on urine drug tests and provide a less intrusive means of achieving the safety goals of the program. In order for an employer to implement oral fluid testing under the department's regulation, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services will need to certify at least 2 laboratories for oral fluid testing, which has not yet been done. The final rule, which includes other provisions to update the department's regulation and to harmonize as needed with the mandatory guidelines for federal workplace drug testing programs using oral fluid established by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. In addition, this rule amends the FAA, FMCSA, FRA, and FTA, all of the agencies we just spoke about, their regulations to ensure consistency within the Department of Transportation and by removing or adjusting references to the word urine and/or add references to oral fluid, as well as removing or amending some definitions for conformity and to make other miscellaneous technical changes or corrections. All right, and it's important to note that this rule becomes final and goes into effect on June 1st, so a few weeks from the posting of this video. All right, so let me break this down into a couple different categories. The first thing I'm going to talk about is some of the barriers to implementing this rule. So the first barrier, and I mentioned it when I was reading through the summary, is first, the Department of Health and Human Services needs to certify 2 labs to do oral fluid testing before an employer can implement saliva testing. So they have to have 2 federally certified labs before this can go into effect. And this certification has not happened yet. To my knowledge, I don't know what point they are, but I doubt that they are going to be able to get this done over the next 3 weeks. So further down in the statement from the feds after the summary, they explain that there must be 1 HHS, Health and Human Services certified laboratory to conduct the screening and confirmation drug testing on the primary specimen. So there needs to be one lab to conduct the screening on the primary specimen. Now, why do they need a second lab? So there must be a different HHS certified laboratory to conduct split specimen drug testing on the secondary specimen if the employee requests split specimen testing for a non-negative result. So if you get a positive result, if one lab gives you a positive result, you have the right to have it retested at another lab. I mean, who knows what can happen at one lab? It could just be a false positive, so they give you the opportunity to have it tested at another lab. Okay, so that is basically just a timing issue, a barrier that is going to take some time to work out. So I don't want everybody to get super excited that this will be 100% implemented on June 1st, because they do have to work out that particular first. There is another barrier to implementing this, and that is that saliva will now be an option for companies to use. So the federal government mandates drug testing for safety-sensitive employees, all the agencies that we just talked about. The company has the option of now has the option of either a urinalysis to perform that drug testing or saliva to perform that drug testing, but it's the employer that has that choice. It's not you as the employee. You as the safety-sensitive employee can say, well, I want to have urine testing done, or I choose to have saliva testing done. This is going to be a company decision. So employees do not get to decide what kind of test they take. And big companies, so think of companies with thousands of employees like UPS, Amazon, FedEx, they may choose to stick with urine testing. And in this case, if this is the case and you work for one of these companies, there will be absolutely no change for these employees. It's just like this new law never went into effect. And in my opinion, many of these companies are going to be resistant to make this change for legal and for liability reasons. So let me try to explain this a little bit using an example. So let's say a company switches from urine testing to saliva testing, and an employee gets saliva tested and then passes, and then God forbid, causes an accident, and then is retested and then tests positive for a drug. Could this then be a legal issue that falls back on the company? Now, I'm not saying that that's right, but we live in a litigious world, and this is kind of just the world that we live in. And I can definitely understand companies wanting to protect themselves and wanting to kind of stick with the status quo and knowing what the laws are and what their liability is and not really wanting to change anything. So the companies are eventually going to be faced with a choice. They need to balance between being able to hire and keep good employees, and there, especially in the transportation industry, there's still a shortage, to keep good employees versus the legal ramifications that potentially could come along with this new rule. And I am no lawyer, no legal expert, but maybe somebody out there is and has some legal expertise. If you could leave a comment, maybe there is potential for tort reform or taking away some of the responsibility or the liability from the company if they were to adopt saliva testing instead of urine testing. All right, so those are two barriers that need to be overcome before the employee will see any benefit to this new rule. But now let's talk about what problems this new rule is intended to try to solve. And in my opinion, like you see my sign back here, this is a big win. This is a big step forward. This is a change that I've been advocating. If you've watched any of my videos on this channel, I've been advocating for this change specifically for years now. So what problems, what issues does this new rule attempt to solve? All right, number one, and what's going to matter most to people out there watching this video most likely, is that the testing window is much shorter for saliva as compared to urine testing. And I have shown this chart from the federal government many times, but I will show it again. This lists the most common drugs tested for and the oral fluid detection window and the urine detection window. And everything is pretty similar except when you get down to marijuana. 2 days is the detection window from the time you stop using that you can detect it from oral fluid testing, from saliva testing, up to 2 months or maybe even beyond 2 months for urine testing. So this is a huge, huge change. People won't be testing positive for months and months and months. The second problem that this aims to solve, and I have done, again, a number of videos about this subject as well, is that it's impossible to then cheat, or I guess virtually impossible to cheat on this type of test. The urinalysis, when you're left alone in a room, makes it very, very easy. It opens the door for cheating. It swings the door wide open to be able to cheat, to substitute the sample, to alter the sample. But if the person taking the sample directly takes it from you, meaning takes the saliva from you, there is no opportunity for you to switch the sample. So it cuts down immensely on the ability to cheat on this test. Number 3 is that it potentially is going to be a cheaper test. So they estimate that it's about $50 for a typical urine test to go through the process versus about $35 for an oral fluid test. And not everybody agrees with that. There was some comments. There was a period where you were allowed to comment on the different parts of this rule. Not everybody agreed with this, but potentially there is a cost-saving aspect to this as well. All right, so in summary, do I have full confidence that this is going to be rolled out within the next few weeks or even relatively soon? I mean, it is the federal government that we're talking about. There are some hoops that need to be jumped through. I am going to stay on top of this subject, and when updates come down, I will continue to make update videos. It's going to be interesting to see how this rolls out, what the implementation times are, what companies adopt this new standard and what companies do not. So whenever I find any of those things out, I will be making update videos. Make sure you stay subscribed here for the latest. All right, until next time, everybody, stay safe.